Bob Djokovic, thank you so much for jumping on.
Well, thanks for having me, Phil.
So I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software. This is a podcast series that we started a couple months ago and in our hopes of uncovering new and interesting companies that otherwise we would not be able to meet. So I'm happy today we have Bob Djokovic. Do you want to take a couple minutes to explain a little bit like what you currently do and what your company's about?
Sure. So, Okika Devices was a combination of three companies. Originally, our CEO, Bill, had a company called Okika Technologies, which was a design services company. So, they designed chips for a variety of customers. Um, one of the customers they designed for was a company called Anodyne, which did FPAAs, which are field programmable analog arrays. So most people are familiar with FPGAs, which is a $98 billion a year industry. Um, those are digital, so our devices are entirely analog. Um, In January of this year, we acquired two companies. One was Anodyne, and the other company was a company called Sophia Tech out of Georgia. And our chief technology officer, Dr. Jennifer Hassler, had that company and partnered with Bill. Um, my first job was to move the company from California to Colorado, which we did. Um, we got our seed funding on August 6th. We had our strategic planning session on August 7th and August 8th, and now it's full speed ahead.
All right. So why the move to Colorado?
Partly because my boss's partner passed away, so there was no longer any reason to stay in California. Part of it had to do with the cost, and part of it had to do with the fact that I was here. And that's not meant to be egotistical. Bill and I worked together at a previous company called Ramtron International, and he was comfortable working with me and comfortable with my style. Um, so that's why the move to Colorado.
I see. Okay. So it makes sense. And what's your current role?
I'm the chief operating officer.
What does a day look like as a COO with your company?
Well, given that we're a startup and de facto we're underfunded and understaffed, the COO does a little bit of
A
everything,
lot of hats, huh?
right? So my primary responsibilities and functions right now are handling the supply chain,
Hmm.
um, staffing the organization. Uh, we've hired a test engineer and procured the appropriate equipment, so we're actively characterizing product in our factory. Um, and then the way Bill and I and another gentleman named Mike Hollabaugh, who's the VP of Marketing, operate, it's a very collaborative space. So there's a lot of bouncing ideas back and forth, and there's a lot of joint decisions. So I'm kind of involved in everything with the company right
And if you had to focus on one thing, what would it be?
now. If I had to focus on one thing right now, it would be modeling the supply chain.
That's your favorite part?
Well, that's so we have our strategic plan. We have a very aggressive growth curve that we are going after right now, and I've been through several high growth opportunities in my past, and so based on experience, I know that if you're going to go from like 20 million to $400 million in 8 years, you're going to have to focus on the capabilities of the supply chain and inflection points where you might need to find additional suppliers because your existing supply chain just can't handle with what you're doing at that point in time.
Sure. Can't handle the scale essentially.
Yeah.
How does that work exactly? Are you looking to just improve on the supply chain, or is it more like contingency plans in case the demand is too high?
The answer to that is both. And one of the things Bill and I were trying to do was onshore the supply chain wherever possible. Right?
Onshore being the US or North America or
North America.
okay.
So right now I have suppliers in Taiwan, China, Germany, Singapore, Malaysia. Um, Being a company in Colorado Springs, we wanted to try to see if we could find Colorado companies, at least North American companies, to move our supply chain. And unfortunately, the people that I've talked to, with the exception of one, kind of act like they don't really want the business. So, I'm not going to find a North American company as cheap as a company in Shenzhen, China.
Sure.
But I am willing to pay a premium. But when the prices come in 3 to 4x what I'm currently paying,
it's hard to justify.
That's untenable, right?
Yeah.
And it's a source of frustration to me, because acknowledging the difference in wages, North America versus Asia, right? If I'm going to build 1,000 PCBAs, you're going to have setup costs where the wages obviously have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
But once they hit go on that printed circuit board assembly line and amortize those setup costs over a relatively large population, I'm of the opinion that the pricing should be much closer than 3 to 4x. So we continue to look for domestic suppliers. The truth of the matter is because I'm such a small company, the pricing I'm getting out of Singapore and Malaysia and Taiwan actually isn't that great. And American companies or North American companies should be able to get close, if not better, just based on the prices I'm paying because I'm so small.
Sure.
So that's been a bit of a frustration to me. Going back to the original question, my primary focus is on securing additional capacity in the future so I can support the growth curve. But if during that process we find an opportunity to upgrade the supply chain, we'll take advantage of that.
Right. And to you, moving onshore is an upgrade? Is it, I assume, partly because of tariffs and maybe uncertainty, or?
Ease of communication.
Mm-hmm.
If I was to visit my supply chain, that would be 25,000 frequent flyer miles.
Sure. In a private jet, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea of being able to go to like Texas as opposed to Singapore would be appealing.
Yeah, that's enticing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. You want to build relationships. You want to be able to communicate better. But again, so far, I've been unsuccessful, with the exception of a foundry in Texas that quoted me a really good price for 130 nanometer wafers. Right now, my products are at 350 nanometer and 180 nanometer, and they can't support either of those. But if we decide to do a shrink down to 130, those are the first people I'm going to talk to, because what they quoted me for 130 is the same as what I'm paying for 350 in Singapore, and that would be appealing to me.
Okay, so you'd be willing to adjust the product essentially based on the supply chain options.
Eventually, the caveat being, again, that we're a startup, so I don't have the cash sitting around to spin a mask set to go down to 130.
To experiment a little bit. Yeah.
Now, having said that, we've got 4 companies talking to us right now about potentially designing chips for them. One of the companies wants us to design a chip at 65 nanometer. One of the companies wants us to design a chip at 40 nanometer, and one of the companies wants us to design a chip at 16 nanometer, And then the fourth company, it's indeterminate what technology node they might want us to use. So, if those happen, and between the four opportunities, there's a very good chance that one to two of them will hit in Q1. All of a sudden, we have a funded opportunity to get to much more advanced technology nodes, and then everything gets way more interesting and fun.
Right. You have more runway to play
Yeah.
with. So, you talked about having kind of an aggressive growth curve, and you also talked about having, I think, done two acquisitions, right, recently. So I assume acquisition or growing by acquisition is a big part of your strategy for growth.
No, our growth curve is based on purely organic.
Oh,
So the two acquisitions we did on January 1st were the two companies in the United States that actually manufacture and develop FPAAs.
hmm,
So over the course of time, our CEO had developed with relationships with them, and cut a deal to pool resources. Um, what we are projecting based on our technology is totally organic growth.
okay, that's nice. And then if obviously a strategic acquisition comes along, you would look at that as well, but it's almost gravy.
That is correct. Our CTO, Dr. Hassler, is a professor at Georgia Tech. And some of her students, she focuses quite a bit on FPAAs
Hmm.
because she's been doing FPAAs for 25 years. Some of her students have attempted startups around the country. And based on the fact that they are familiar with the technology, there could be strategic reasons to potentially partner or acquire to get that skill set um, under our roof. Um, but those conversations aren't going on yet. Having said that, we are in conversation with these people, just kind of comparing notes.
Okay, nice. Won't get into confidential information, but it's good. What's the hardest part about running a business like yours?
I've been doing this a year or two. So running operations is my sweet spot. I will say that the hardest part of this job, which is in essence a startup, was starting from dirt.
Hmm.
So every other job I ever had, I walked in, there was an HR department, there was a
Yeah,
quality department, there was an IT department, there was a chair. Um, and, and this time around, it was absolutely nothing. So given that this was unique to my experience, I had to find a building. I had to find IT services. I had to find internet services. I had to get insurance. I had to get medical insurance, which, by the way, wasn't easy for a small
no, because you don't. Yeah, yeah. It's always a volume thing. It's the same thing with your supply chain, right? If you have low volume, it's
company. Yep. Yeah.
hard to negotiate.
Yeah. Well, we did come up with a more than satisfactory solution. It only took me 7 months.
It only took you 7 months. Yeah, insurance. Am I
um,
right?
yeah. So the hardest part of this so far has been um, doing things that I had never done before and didn't know how to do.
Yeah. So basically, invent. Um,
Yeah.
and what made you choose a startup at this stage of your career? You coming from, I guess, an
Um,
enterprise or mid-market background?
the primary reason was the opportunity to work with Bill and Mike again.
Hmm.
So Bill and I worked together. Bill and Mike and I worked together for 5.5 years at a company called Lantron International. And we grew that place in 5 or 6 years from 3 million to 65 million,
Oh, wow.
right? And so our working styles were complementary. Um, there were virtually no politics at the senior level of management because A, we liked each other, and B, nobody else wanted anybody else's job.
Right. So really a good complement of skills.
Yeah. And the truth of the matter is the jobs I've had the last 7 or 8 years were not satisfactory. So the opportunity to work again with a team that I trusted, and see how far we can run this one up as well was very appealing to me.
I see. And what's the ambition for the business? Like, where do you see it in 5 years?
I'll answer that two different ways. Number one, within 5 years, based on organic growth, we should be bumping up around 70 to $100 million in revenue. Having said that, once our technology goes prime time and people really understand how good this technology is, one of the big boys is going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
So the chances of an acquisition of getting acquired in the next 2 to 4 years are pretty high, which I personally don't want to happen. I'd like to grow this thing to 250 million, but
On your own.
right, right. But our management team, as you can tell, looking for me, is pretty vintage.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe for Mike and for Bill, this is the last job of their careers, and
Right. So
so
you'd hate to see it end abruptly because of an
yeah,
acquisition. Yeah, I see what you mean. You want to take it as far as you can.
yeah,
What's um what's your relationship with AI at the company?
it's a very good question. Our relationship is that we are talking to two AI companies about designing chips for them.
Mm-hmm.
So um, one of the advantages of our technology compared to digital is we are 1,000th the power that a digital solution provides. So if you've read any of the articles or stories about people building power plants
Mm-hmm.
just for AI farms, they wouldn't need those with our technology. And a couple of companies have recognized that in the next couple of months and have started talking to us.
Okay.
Um, our technology has additional advantages to digital solutions and AI in that our technology is virtually zero latency. What does that mean? That means you don't have to wait for something to happen. So we're going to be faster than a digital solution in the AI space. So the AI world has taken notice. And then there is a company in Europe that's a quantum computing company
Mm-hmm.
that we're also talking to about designing a chip for.
Okay. So quantum and AI, those are two good spaces to be in at the moment, obviously.
Correct.
And like you said, and correctly stated, there's a bit of a compute race for compute, right? And its limiting factor is the energy. Um, so where's it coming from, right?
Correct.
Um, so okay, interesting. I didn't even really think of the analog aspect uh, for that. I mean, I think my question was more about like internally how you use AI or automation or machine learning.
I have two interns from the local college.
Okay.
Okay. And they're all about the AI. So how do we use AI? Well, my interns, I ask my interns to write their own job description and they spit something into Chat GBT and then a paper comes out, they give it to me. Um, we use AI for recording and storing all of our meeting notes.
Yeah.
So as opposed to sitting there with a yellow notepad, you just kind of click on and then store it on the hard drive, as the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Our design team, to my knowledge, has not been using AI. But those are the primary areas where we're using AI in our workspace right now. And part of the rest of the management team, excluding me, will use AI to potentially get the first draft on a press release or something like that,
Yeah.
and then clean it up a little bit. So ChatGPT and other AI tools are pretty prevalent in our company.
And you said excluding you. Like,
Yep.
are you actively trying to avoid it?
Yeah. I have actively avoided social media. So I'm sure.
That's smart, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Um, so the AI thing I actively avoided just because it's something new and I'm stubborn, but I'm sure after spending more time with my interns, I'm going to wind up diving into it.
Yeah, you kind of have to become friends with it before it takes over, right?
Right.
That's the strategy, um, which will happen. The question is when.
Yep.
Probably not next year. If you had to change one thing about the industry you're in, like maybe something that you find frustrating that you're stuck with, and it's not necessarily from your own company, it's just from the process. It could be the sale process, it could be supply chain related, like you said. What would it be?
I'll tell you my main point of frustration based on, especially on, I mentioned that my jobs the last 7, 8 years were not satisfactory.
Hmm.
Um, the last two companies I worked at, there was an incredible tolerance to waste.
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. I worked at a company for about 6 months. They hired me as the senior plant director. This was a $200 million company. And I walk in, there's no metrics, and everything seems broken. And so after a couple weeks there, I'm kind of overwhelmed because I don't know where to start. So I developed this metric. Basically, what the metric did was look at the router hours and then look at the execution against the router hours. And then I Paretoed that out so I could find the area or product that was the most broken and start fixing it, right? Well, in a 10-month period, the company was 18,000 hours over the router times. So that translates to 540 lost man weeks of capacity and velocity. And that translates obviously to degradation of the margins and the profitability of the company. And the fact that that company operated that way, um, and kind of shrugged their shoulders about it for so long was a source of frustration to me.
Hmm.
Um, the company previous to that was what was the same way. I put some metrics in there. Um, the machine shop was 120% over the router hours. And this company had been running for 35 years like that. So my experience at Advanced Energy and my experience at Ryan-Tron International, those teams took a 0.5% yield hit as a personal insult. It just wouldn't be tolerated, right? And I think this ties into earlier comments about the fact that I'm getting 300 to 400% price over what is happening in China or Taiwan. Is this could be an overly broad statement, but what I've seen, including the PCBA companies I've quoted in North America, is it's just like, well, this is how we do business and this is how much it costs,
Hmm.
right?
So you're paying for their inefficiency.
Yeah, right. And I worked at Advanced Energy. We got to the point where it was equivalent manufacturing domestically as it was in China. Now, there were a couple caveats to that. One was that the majority of our customers were in the United States, so the shipping costs from China to North America, especially since we were shipping 400 and 500 and 600 pound devices. Um, that shipping cost was a big deal. The tariffs and the taxes that we had to pay going in and out of China contributed to that. But there was also an element that we drove all the waste out of the processes. So because we were so efficient, um, our overheads as a company dropped, which I believe is also a contributor to North American companies being more expensive than Asian companies. But at least in one case, we proved that you can get close to equivalent to manufacturing offshore if you put your mind
So the waste and being complacent is a recurring theme on this podcast. Um,
to it. Is it?
it is. And so, if everyone's like that, is it just a fact of life of running a business? I wonder. So obviously there are degrees of inefficiency, but so far every single guest has areas there where there's a lot of waste, and it's good because for me it warms my heart to hear that, because some of our employees claim we're inefficient, and that but we say no, look, this $200 million company does the same thing. um, Final question for you, Bob, and really appreciate your thoughtful answers today. Outside of your own company, right, and your own R&D, where do you see the most where are you most excited about innovation in your space, right? So outside of what you're building, but what do you see out there where that you're really getting excited about from an innovation standpoint?
Well, AI, of course, even though AI to a large extent scares me. Um,
Sure. A bit of a
uh,
black box.
yeah. The quantum computing, the concept that you don't have ones and zeros, you have ones and zeros at the same time. And, you kind of wiggle an electron up and down or however they do it. But so I see that as very interesting. There have been quite a few uh, papers within the last 1 to 2 years about analog computing. And there's some companies doing research that indicate that analog computing is much faster and much more efficient than digital computing. I'm curious to see where that's going to go. There's a self-serving aspect to those answers in that those are areas that we can play in very effectively. Um, and for our company, um, if one of these designs hits at either 16 or 20 or 40 nanometer, that now allows us to operate in the RF space, and the entire world opens up to potentially using our technology. So from a personal standpoint and from a Okika Devices standpoint, that's what's exciting to me.
Yeah, that would be pretty exciting. Basically opens your TAM gets much larger, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much for jumping on today. This was absolutely great. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, and then this is going to be on all the major platforms.
Thank you very much for your time, Phil. It was a pleasure.